I don't know. I didn't have a driving thing like you did as a young kid. I think I just, I got out of high school, I worked and did things, and eventually went to a school, and I started out as a broadcaster, went to small stations like in Michigan, Indiana, and worked my way back to Chicago. The first job was at WXFM in Elmwood Park. It was a small FM station. It was like in a garage. We did everything. I think radio now has evolved back to what we did then, and this was like in 1960, where you did everything. You put a record on, you went out and you got a hot dog, and you came back, and you found the record was stuck. You wrote commercials, you announced, you did everything. You engineered, you took care of the transmitter. That was the first job. When I went to GES, what a vivid memory. When I went there, it was owned by a white doctor, and it was a mixed station. There, one of the big, it was black, Spanish, it was Polish. Al Benson was a guy who, I don't know if you remember, but to me he was the Howard Miller of the blacks in the early days. When he came into the studio, he was a real big man, and they worked like an hour a day. They did one show, and that was it. First you might have Al Benson, then you might have a Polish station. I think Adamowski's cousin did a Polish radio station show there. And what I did was I was like a combination record turner, announcer, newsman, and engineer. And so I stayed in the studio with them. And one day Al Benson, he walked out. And so then I was a disc jockey. And that was it. And then after we were there a while, then GES was bought by McClendon and became Y&R. I don't remember what it was, but it was supposed to be. This was in the introduction to what they called big time radio. They were all these people from Texas. They had all black announcers except one. I think it was Dick Kemp, the wild child. He was the only white guy on the station. And they had production, they had everything. Everything was going to be big time. And I think after the initial running of the record for 24 hours, they had promotions where they put $1,000 bills in Lincoln Park and all that kind of stuff. But I also remember that, them talking about it being big time radio, that all these guys who were there, Lucky Cordell, Floyd Brown, I can't think of all the other ones.
Big John Evans.
Big John, yeah, good friend of mine. John Evans.
Bruce Brown.
But Bruce came later. And all these guys used to come in. I think Lucky Cordell came in from Gary and worked an hour. And I think he made as much as he did working a whole week for McClendon. And they had to put in, appearances and all that kind of stuff. But this was now big-time radio. Wait a while. Oh, okay. Well, by that time, we were at 87th and Kedzie. And the only thing I really remember then is that it was so touching, and we had a direct line with the people in Texas, which we kept the phone off the hook all the time. And the thing that I remember most is that Lucky Cordell was on the air, and when they said that Kennedy had been shot, and it went around the whole thing. First he had been shot, and you were led to believe that he was alive, and then it kept going on, and then we finally got the word on the phone that there was no way that he was going to make it. And I mean, it was so tender. I was in the production studio getting things in, getting stuff into Lucky, and he couldn't talk. I mean, the tension was so high in there, the feeling, the remorse of a real big loss, that I don't know. I mean, it was just a real touch and go day. It was tough to work. A pesty ass kid. You were a pain in the ass. I don't know. I know I used to work with a musician. I think he was a piano player, Art Sims, who was a real good friend of mine. And you were always there. This was this young kid. I mean, there were a lot of people like that who wanted to get started in radio, and you were just under everybody's foot all the time. You were a likable kid, but a pain in the ass. The first day, let's see, the first day I did first of all, to get the job, yeah. Well, I didn't work there that long. I worked at Y&R, and a friend of mine, and this was a time when it was almost like you could be hired by someone else and make more money, and then you could go back and get more somewhere else. It was really a good station, and they needed people. They needed board guys. And so I worked with Purvis Spann and E. Rodney Jones, Herb Kent, the cool gent, and the only people that I know that really impressed me, now Mahalia Jackson was there, who I liked from the start. I mean, I really loved. She walked in, and I thought it was like an old washerwoman. I mean, she was so plain and so everyday and so down to earth that it just knocked me right off the floor. I just loved her. And Wesley South, he always did shows there. The people I can't think of by name. Mahalia Jackson was the one who really left an impression on me. Oh, you have to talk to Britton about that.
Yep. Yes, Bill. Oh, well, Al walked into the studio. They said, I hadn't been there very long at WCFL, and they said, we have a new young guy that is going to be an engineer for your show, and he's going to be sensational. And I said, I don't want a new engineer. And so they said, you don't want a new engineer? And I said, no. And they gave me Al anyway. But and from that moment, there was a chemistry about the show that, and a joy to work with Al, of course, all those years that I've never really experienced. I hadn't experienced prior to that feeling of accomplishment of everything you wanted to do in radio, or I've never felt that since then. So it was a magic moment for me with Al. And there were a lot of magic moments during that course of that show that Al and I worked together. It was uncanny because the show was very spontaneous, and it was made up of a lot of drop-ins and wild tracks, and we would also do little skits on the show, and that was the only sort of setup things. I don't know if that you understand, or your audience will understand setups, but what I mean by that is you have a plan of action. You have a start and a middle and hopefully a finish for your bit, whereas wild tracks or drop-ins are just thrown in while you're doing your show. These setups, though, were very loose, and I would go into Al and say, now I'm going to be looking for an animal in the jungle, and I'll be talking as this certain character, and so play that jungle background. And then when you feel that this lion is about ready to jump out at me, we'll have him roar. In other words, there was never any cue for anything. It just all flew. And then when you feel that it's, speaking you, meaning Al Urbanski, it's time to shoot this lion, well, shoot him. And then we'll have the finish of whatever, an end fanfare or whatever. But it was, as I said before, uncanny working with Al, because he was there before I was in my mind, and he knew and could anticipate what I was going to do, and that's what made it even funnier, because the thought was in my head, and then when I'd hear it materialize in the form of what Al did, it broke me up. Somebody said that in a very negative way, that it sounds like this was a negative comment about the show. It sounds like Britton goes on the air and entertains himself for 3 hours, and of course that was true. We did entertain ourselves. There was a lot of laughs. I mean, we'd start laughing till I was crying. You know, tears were rolling down my cheeks when we were doing things that I thought were really hot and funny, and they were. I mean, in listening back to those tapes, it was phenomenal, I must say. We did everything and more that I had ever wanted to do in radio, and I felt that it was an art form, and it was, of course, theater of the mind at its very best, because it was not like the old drama radios where you listen back to some of those old shows and they sound kind of corny. We were doing things that it was like impressionistic radio. If there was a sound of waterfall, it wasn't exactly the sound of a waterfall. Maybe it was water pouring out of a glass or whatever. It wasn't the exact sound, so it was very rough that way. I don't know if I'm jumping too much to all of these points, but I just wanted to express my feeling of thinking and working with Al, that we produced some of the wildest shows and the funniest to me. And I think Al had some laughs, too, along the line.
Probably one of the most uncanny things about the whole thing is that he could take something and make something of nothing. I mean, take, for example, Cleo, the voice Cleo, was a janitor at the place. He's still using him 20 years later. And not only that, I mean, he could make things, with this and do things, not only with Cleo, but other things. They were like insignificant, and all of a sudden they would be mushrooming and growing, and they would get funnier and funnier. And that's the whole thing. And, like you said about having fun, that's what we did. When we were on for like 3 hours, it not only was a challenge, but you were actually having fun. And, sometimes you would try and stick him to get him in a corner, and you could never do that. I mean, he was like a comedian. He's like you being in a nightclub, and he being the comedian. You could never outdo him. So
that's not true, Al. But that was the funny thing, because what would happen was the continuity of whatever I was doing or trying to do at the time, Al would embellish. And, of course, it would go from point A all the way out to left field, and had nothing to do with where we started from. And there were so many times that we did that. And to listen back to that stuff and say, my God, where in the hell is all that coming from? I mean, it's going... It always went someplace, and it was Al, of course, that made that stuff work, because if the thing had no continuity... Excuse my cold. If it had no continuity, then it just wouldn't work, because I'd worked with other people at CFL when Al was on break or whatever, and they didn't have that same flair, that knowledge, that ability, that comedic sense to make the thing work. And that's really what it was all about. And, of course, enjoying personally off the air and having so much respect for Al and being a good friend, it was just magic for me. It was just, as I said, everything that I had ever wanted to do in radio, we did during that period at CFL with Al. Urbanski is the other half of the team. It was Urbanski and Britton, really. Well, I was waiting for you to ask about this Checker gasoline commercial, because this was an
the one that was on the Sub Circus?
No, this was not. This was one that I don't know. It was a loose night. I don't recall. I mean, it might have been a Saturday night or
was it
Friday.
A giveaway for a pencil or something?
Well, yes, it was. And that's what happened. I got this commercial for a gasoline company in Chicago, or I guess maybe they're all over the Midwest or Illinois at any rate. And I read the copy cold, and there was nothing planned. I mean, as far as making fun of the commercial or whatever. I just started reading it, and the essence of the commercial was that it was back to school time, and because of this, Checker gasoline, when you went in for a fill-up, you get a free pencil with every fill-up. Well, as I read that, and this is one of the dangers of reading cold copy, I mean, not reading it over before you read it on the air, I started thinking how absurd that was. You go drive into a gas station, ask for a fill-up, you get a lead pencil? And I started laughing. And, of course, I was really fair game and really very vulnerable at that time. And Al just pounced on me, because then he started throwing in I used to have a thing, well, I still do on the show. My perception of radio was always to have a studio audience. And the mythical studio audience was in the studio at all times, and of course they would always that was Al's voice of showing delight or displeasure because they booed, they cheered, they did all sorts of things. They were very, when I recorded these groups of people, they were, in my mind, very, they were the epitome of roughnecks. Maybe that's, I don't know. I can't think of a good word. But anyway, so Al started throwing in the studio audience. They were booing and saying, "Get out of here, you big jerk." And it was one of those Steve Allen kind of commercials where I laughed for I think we timed the commercial as 3 or 4 minutes. I laughed so hard on that thing. And it kept getting further and further into left field as Al would stop with one thing, he'd pick up on another thing, and each sentence got funnier to me. So, and I try to compose myself, and I lost it all the way through the whole thing. Well, the Chuck Bloor jingles were, to me, jingles that set the pace for of course, whatever station uses, set the pace for my show because they were like jingles that, through audio, were like the curtain going up on a Broadway musical. The stage lights were on when these things hit because they were big, full, orchestrated jingles that were not like anything that you had heard on the radio or since then. They were just magnificent to set the feeling of my perception and Al's perception of radio at that time, because what we were doing was a radio musical comedy show, and these jingles set the pace for that. I assume that you're going to give us a sample of one of these jingles along the way, so yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, let's see. I introduced him a couple of times. One time, remember the gum chains? Well, I asked everybody if they really loved the Beatles to send in their gum chains, and I had about 10 miles of gum chain on the stage, and I said, you know who these are for, and of course it was difficult, to introduce and act like the Beatles, because everything that you did, just the anticipation for the Beatles, and so of course the audience went up for grabs. And then another time I was thinking, how can I introduce these people? And so I pinned a British flag, and I wore tux to introduce them, and I opened the coat lining, and then the audience went wild again. I worked with the Stones and the Beatles quite a lot, and I remember one time after introduced the Beatles, and they played their set. Giving anything away from the Beatles was really, that was a super deal on the air at the time. I mean, if you had do you have a handkerchief? if you had like a gum wrapper or something that the Beatles used, that was great. So I thought, what can I do? What can I get from the Beatles that? What can I get from the Beatles? This is Al dropping a sound effect in on me. Excuse me. Oh, Al, he's still crazy as ever. What can I get from the Beatles? And immediately after the Beatles performed, their security around their equipment, everything was it was immense. I mean, they had these burly guards and everything. They'd come in there, and so the Beatles stopped playing, end of the show. I said, thank you, my Tulu babes, which I called, instead of saying ladies and gentlemen, I still do, the word Tulus. My Tulu babes, Chico buddy buddies, and my ducky friends. And don't ask me what it means, because I don't know. I just made it up, and that was it. So I said, do you enjoy the show? And they said, yes, and that was it. And I gracefully just kept backing up to Ringo's drumsticks, and I put them in my pocket, and nobody saw them. I copped his drumsticks. And I was going to give them away on the air, and I thought, boy, is this going to be I was thinking, first of all, I cut it up in pieces, these drumsticks, and then I thought, no, this is a little bit of history here. And then I thought, I'll keep them. So I did. So I've got Ringo's drumstick someplace. And it was interesting, too, story about who was the leader of the group. These interviews that they used to grant the press, we would be, as a radio station, involved as personalities on the air and sitting with the Beatles at these conferences, press conferences, up on a platform of some sort. And Beatles were always bored by this. And I was sitting next to John, and he was bored. And he was giving those curt answers, of course, and by this time, stock almost. And I started drawing a picture of a log cabin, I think, and John looked over and I said, that's where Abe Lincoln was born. And somebody caught a series of photographs of this thing, and they saw me drawing, then they saw John looking over, asking what that was, and then in the next picture, you saw Paul looking over John's shoulder, asking what that was. Then in the next picture, you see George asking. And the final one, you see Ringo looking at the, and that was the pecking order, really, of the Beatles. It was John, Paul, George, and then Ringo. I talked, and once you were with these guys, the security was so immense at any of these hotels where they were staying. You would go into their suite or whatever, and you would just be in prison, really, there with them, until showtime or whatever. And so you had a lot of time to talk and just kill time. And so I started talking with Ringo at the time about pirate ships, because they were very big, and we were talking about anything but the Beatles. We were talking about England, we were talking about things in America, what he liked, for about 2 hours. And I said, oh, by the way, Ringo, I do something. I say, instead of hi, ladies and gentlemen, I say hi, Toulouse on the air. And I'd gotten the Stones to cut hi, Toulouse. Mick Jagger did a hi, Toulouse babes, and a scream. Hi, Toulouse. Ah! Like that. And I had Peter and Gordon and Chad and Jeremy and the Hollies and all of the English groups saying hi, Toulouse. Some of them identified themselves as the Dave Clark Five. Some of them didn't. I thought with the Beatles, I didn't want it to be that crass, and I just said, Ringo, I say this hi Toulouse. Would you just say hi Toulouse? Don't say Ringo. This is Ringo. Hi. This is Ringo on the Ron Britton show. Nothing like that. Nothing that commercial. Just say hi Toulouse. Hi Toulouse babes. And Ringo, after this conversation, I thought we were the best of pals. For like 2 or 3 hours. And he said, oh, no, we don't do any of that sort of thing. That's commercial. No. And so I asked John if he would do that. And on the tape, I don't know if you remember this, Al. Do you remember taking the lift off of there? You could hear this, I don't care, give me that. Hi, Tulu babes. And it was John. And then it was Paul saying hi, Tulu babes. And then it was George. And then it was Ringo in the pecking order again. And anything John did or said, that was what went. That was law. That's what went down. And so that's what I recall about the Beatles. I don't know if those are boring stories, but they're interesting to me, and I thought it might give you an insight into
Big check.
Well, Al's name, he'll have to spell it for you. Mine is spelled B-R-I. Okay. No, it's a pleasure. We loved it. And it's great seeing Al. When I said Al was going to be here, I'll tell you that's payment enough.